Hi guys, welcome back to Art at Home with Miss Roxanne. We are going to be doing a little kitchen craft today. So today what we're going to be doing is learning how to make a type of air dry clay called salt dough. And as you might guess, for salt dough, what we are going to be using is quite a lot of salt. We're also going to be using some flour, about a cup of water, and that's it. So I've got my bowl here, I've got my salt and my measuring cup, and we're ready to begin. Now, the nice thing about salt dough is that it's very simple. It's really just 2 ingredients plus water. It rolls out very thin and even, and it dries by itself, although you can slowly bake it in either a toaster oven or a regular oven. So for our salt dough today, we need 1 full cup of salt. So even though it does use quite a lot of salt, that's kind of okay because it's something we can get fairly inexpensively. So as far as homemade air dry clays go, this has the fewest ingredients and the least cost. You don't have to add anything to it that makes it more complicated or more expensive. Like some air dry clays that you make from home use a lot of cinnamon, some use cream of tartar. We don't need to add any of that to salt dough. Merlin's gonna help. Okay, goodbye Merlin. There we go. Take your time. Get all that salt into your cup. So you can use salt dough to make ornaments. You can use it to make little sculptures. You can do all kinds of things with salt dough. You can also use it just to play with. It makes a very good Play-Doh. Now with any homemade air dry clay or any homemade type of Play-Doh, although it is non-toxic and it's made out of edible ingredients, I would not call this an edible Play-Doh truly, because although it won't harm you to accidentally eat it, it's certainly not intended for eating. So if you have a little one who gets an accidental little taste of salt dough, that's not harmful, but you don't want to eat the whole thing. However, the extremely salty taste of it really prevents that from happening for most kids. Okay, so we put in 1 cup of salt. I'm going to add to that half of my 1 cup of water. So we're going to put in a total of 1 cup of water, but we're going to start off by doing just a half cup. So I've got my 1 cup already measured out. I'm going to pour half of it, so that means a half cup. Just a little splash more. Here we go. That is 1/2. If you want to get a really deep sensory experience, you can put your hands right in here and feel the grains of salt mixing with the water. If you use warm water, it's very nice. If you don't really like that type of sensation, or you just want to get straight to it and mix your salt dough, you can use a spoon. And you want to just mix it around until the water is well blended with the salt. The salt won't soak up all of this water, and we don't want it to, because we want to save some left over to get soaked up into our flour. So next up, we're going to add 2 cups of flour. So the whole recipe is just 1 cup of salt, 1 cup of water, 2 cups of flour. Very, very simple. I'm going to shake up my flour bag a little bit just to break it up in there. And let's get out our 2 cups. So there we go. We level that off a little. Good. So just a little at a time, get that 2 cups in. So I'm putting in 1 cup, and then I want to stir it around. Get that well mixed. There we go. So now that it's starting to form some doughy clumps in here, I'll show you. So you've got a clumpy dough. Now I want to add just a little bit more water, not an exact amount, just a splash. This is going to help my salt dough come out a really even consistency. And nothing bad will happen if you were to just dump in 2 cups of flour, dump in a cup of salt, dump in a cup of water. This is just a way to get it really, really smooth as a dough. So I'm using my spoon to work out any unevenness or any lumps in the dough. And now you can see it is much smoother. Time to add in my 2nd cup of flour. I'm going to keep out my flour bag and keep my water at the ready in case I want to add either more flour or more water. Even if you're using the same recipe, it can come out a little bit differently each time. So if it feels unusually dry, add a bit more water. If it feels like it's not consistent enough, add a little bit more flour, thicken it up. If it feels ragged and not smooth, stir more. And if stirring more doesn't solve that problem, then you want to add in more salt. Salt will help keep the consistency. And I may do just that because I've got my 2 cups of flour, I've got my 1 cup of water, I've got my 1 cup of salt. And my dough is looking okay, but a little ragged. Let me show you what I mean by ragged. So instead of a smooth bowl, it's got all these jagged edges. So I'm going to add just a touch more water to this, I think, and give it a good feel. Maybe it'll come together better when I'm kneading it. Oh, perhaps I won't add more water after all. We'll give it a chance, as is, and then we'll see if it needs either more water or more salt as we go on. So, once you've got a very sticky dough, you want to start to roll it around still in the bowl. There we go. That hand mixing is bringing it together more, much less ragged, much more smooth. However, I am going to take a little dusting of flour and just dust over the top of it and pat that on lightly. And now that makes the mixing process easier inside the bowl. So, like I said before, this is a dough for playing with, not a dough for eating. Even though we're using food products and we're mixing in a very similar way. This is a favorite of mine to use for making Christmas ornaments. But even though it's not Christmas time, we can certainly make decorations with it. So we're going to take that right out. Pop it on the counter. And we'll start to roll out our dough. All right, that did not need any more salt. It did not need any more water, so that's good. And that little dusting of flour was all we needed to make our dough, which is the base of our lovely air dry clay. So you can flop it around a few times. This is a lot of dough. So this is plenty for making lots and lots of projects. So if we're going to roll it out and make some ornaments, what we want to do is lightly flour the surface for when we roll it out. So you could either lightly flour or you could use parchment paper. If you are doing this at a kitchen table or a dining room table or a table tray, you could skip the flouring stage and use just a plastic plate, a plastic tray. It won't stick nearly as much to the plastic. But that dough, that flour really, really helps to prevent the dough from sticking to the surface. And we don't want the dough to stick to the surface when we roll it out and cut out ornament shapes. So we might not be making Christmas ornaments because it's not necessarily a Christmas time of year. However, we can make ornaments to decorate windows. We can make ornaments just for fun. So I refloured my surface. I'm popping my dough back down, giving it a little swat. Now it's ready to roll out. So if you have a rolling pin handy, then I certainly suggest using a rolling pin for this. If you don't have a rolling pin handy, you can pat in a circle with your hands. But we want to roll so that it is no thicker than the first knuckle on your hand. So I check it against that, much thinner. Depending on your oven and on the consistency that your dough came out to, and depending on the humidity of the room that you're working in, when you bake your dough, which you don't have to do because this does air dry, but if you choose to bake your dough to make it a little bit harder and more durable, longer lasting. So if you choose to bake it, depending on those factors of humidity where you are, the oven that you have, the mix of the dough, it might rise slightly in the oven and puff up, or it might shrink slightly in the oven and become smaller. So you can't necessarily control for that. So you gotta have a little bit of flexibility in thinking when it comes to making salt dough ornaments. And you don't necessarily have to make ornaments out of this salt dough. It can be a dough just for squeezing, getting a little stress out. Let's see, I've got some cookie cutters. So you make salt dough ornaments or salt dough play shapes really just exactly the same way that you would do with cookies. You roll the dough out, you use cookie cutters on it. The only thing I would add to that is that if you are intending to make these for ornaments, then you want to use something to cut out a little hole in the top. You can wait for it to dry slightly and get harder, and you can use a pen, or if you have, this is a metal straw, so if you have a metal straw, a plastic straw, straws are great for cutting out the hole to make the little spot for an ornament. You can see I used the straw to cut that one. This is a little bit floppy, so I think I would suggest cut all your shapes first before you put the hole in, because the dough is very, very soft. I'm going to roll that a little bit more evenly. And let's see, what other shapes do we have? We've got some dinosaurs. Make a few dinosaur ornaments. Well, my dinosaur is too narrow for this dough. I'm gonna have to get this dough really thin to be used to dinosaurs. Those are skinny ornaments. Let's see, oh, we've got a star. Do I have a heart in here too? I've got a bell. All right, a star. So if you happen to have these items handy in your kitchen, this is a fun thing to do with them. That star didn't cut out very easily. I'm gonna have to roll this dough out much thinner. So rolling it out thinner than the first knuckle on your finger really only works if that is also the size of the ornaments that you intend to use, or the cookie cutters rather, that you intend to use. So I'm gonna roll this out so that it matches the actual depth of my cookie cutters. So I've got my little star, much better. And I'm just gonna let that sit in the dough and peel it out at the end. I've got a little bell. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna let it sit in the dough and peel it out once it's had a few minutes to harden. We've got a lion. There goes the lion. So you can get several of these ready to cut out. I think I'll do lots of stars. You can even make a garland out of all those stars. And now I'm just going to peel the rest of the dough around what I've cut out. So I'm going to let these dry for a few hours. If you want to bake them in the oven, I do suggest let them dry for a good hour, maybe 2 hours before you bake them, so that they have a chance to harden up. That way what you're doing with baking is really just making it more solid and more durable, and that should reduce any amount of rise that would otherwise happen to your dough. So if you want for your salt ornaments to puff up, pop them in the oven straight away. But if not, if you want them to stay thin and a bit hard, then what you want to do is let them dry for 1 hour, maybe 2 hours. Poke it, see if it feels very solid, like a burnt cookie. And if it does, then it can go into the oven. And what you want to do is just put the oven on 350. And you have to kind of watch it. There is not a perfect exact time. I would say it's between 15 minutes and half an hour. But you really want to keep an eye, because I've even had salt doughs, and using exactly the same recipe, same steps every time, I've even had salt doughs that need to come out after 5 minutes. So it's not an exact process as far as the finishing step goes. But again, you don't have to put these in the oven. These will air dry very, very nicely. So I've got my stars ready. I'm just peeling out the extra dough in between them so they have a chance to dry. You can use a little spatula to get underneath them. Set that aside and get this little star too. But you don't need to see me pull out every single star that I made. That is our basic salt dough recipe. So as a reminder, that salt dough recipe was just 1 cup salt, 2 cups flour, 1 cup water. Mix it all together, roll it out on a floured surface to make ornaments, or just use it as a nice Play-Doh. It has a good thickness to it, so you can really squeeze it. Very, very good for some stress relief. Get that out. And that's it. I look forward to making art with you again another time. So, stay safe and stay creative. Bye-bye for now.